So we've been covering the Brandon Herrera campaign, and obviously the elephant in the room is the scandal that is currently implicating the incumbent running against Brandon, Representative Tony Gonzalez. Now, there hasn't been much more that's come out about this in the past couple days, so I thought we'd take a moment to look at how the unsubscribed podcast boys have responded to the allegations against Tony Gonzalez. But before we get into that, I just need to add a disclaimer here, saying that the allegations are just allegations, that you should not take them as fact, and that you should instead treat them as unverified rumor, and that the MattyO channel has not independently verified these allegations and the other stuff you see on screen now. So obviously, I don't know if you guys saw, Brandon put up this video called The Truth About Tony the other day when he went through and looked at the released text messages. Now, these text messages we covered in the last video, and they were released by the husband of the woman who allegedly had an affair with Representative Gonzalez. The husband put them out there obviously because they make his case for him. It's very hard to look at those text messages and see anything other than an inappropriate workplace relationship, if not more. So I would recommend going to watch Brandon's video about that if you haven't already. He does not pull any punches, and Brandon is pushing very hard for Tony Gonzalez to resign. Obviously, we all saw his post here where he said, "I have now seen some of the text messages between Tony Gonzalez and his late aide. It is now clear to me that Tony Gonzalez is a predator who abused his position of power and wrecked a family. I also now know that this is not the only case. He must resign." So Brandon was not pulling any punches here. He's going for the win. Let's just be honest. He's going to push this and ride this to the victory in the election. I can't blame him. This is a huge problem, especially in a deep red state like Texas, where people tend to be more conservative and have more religious values. Allegations of an affair are very serious down there. So I'm obviously not surprised to see Brandon going after this really hard. And also, I think just on a moral level, I'm sure Brandon has more information than the rest of us because he seems to have been in contact with the husband. So obviously, on a moral level, I think it says something about Brandon that he's willing and able to call out people for stuff like this and that he's going through with it. Obviously, on a personal level, I think that affairs are wrong. As you may know, I'm a Catholic. We don't even really like divorce. So yeah, I'm glad to see Brandon taking a stand against this. The one thing that got me out of this, though, is when he said this is not the only case. I'm very interested to see what he meant by that. And so is Angry Cops here, who responded and said, "It's not the only case, question mark, exclamation point." And yeah, I think that's a big bombshell, and I'm wondering when that's going to come out. But Brandon is not the only member of the Unsubscribed podcast who's talked about this. We had the Fat Electrician weighing in, and we're going to read his tweet here. What the Chubby Electron said is, "My guess is that Representative Gonzalez will never resign because he has his wife convinced this is all fabricated to smear him politically. Resigning is admitting it's true. If he resigns, he loses his career and family, but if he denies it until the end, he might keep his family. He should at a minimum suspend his campaign for the sake of the congressional seat." Now, I don't think that this is an unlikely thing. Obviously, I can't say what's going through Tony's head. What I will say is I agree with the Fat Electrician on the fact that he should at a minimum suspend his campaign. Regardless of if the rest of his premise here is true, which I have no way of knowing if it is or not, I do think that Tony suspending his campaign is probably the best option. Obviously, the Republicans have a very small majority in the House right now, so there is an argument that can be made from a political standpoint that we should put aside our moral objections and, not turn on somebody in the Republican Party simply because they are alleged to have done something that is morally bad. But I do think that we should, as the Republican Party, probably not promote candidates like this, and part of doing that would be having Tony suspend his campaign. That being said, I don't know if I agree with the argument that Tony shouldn't resign. I'm just saying that the argument that we should throw out our morals is definitely one that's being discussed in Washington. But obviously, I don't actually expect him to suspend his campaign. As of right now, Tony's stance on this is blanket denial. And quite frankly, I can understand some wait and see from the Republican Party leadership because Tony hasn't responded to the allegations yet. He could have some magical thing that completely absolves him of everything that happened in this. Obviously, now that those text messages came out, I really don't expect something like that to happen, but it is possible that somehow this has all been a big misunderstanding. Do I think that's likely? No, but it is possible, and it would be unfair and wrong for me to not admit that that's a possibility. Like I said at the beginning of these videos, these are still just allegations. Tony has not been proven to have done anything in any court of law or anything. So I can understand some Republicans being iffy on asking him to resign, especially after we had so many Republicans go after George Santos, and look how that ended up. It was a mess. Granted, George Santos was definitely not a morally sound person, but he was in a podcast I listened to. He's very funny. Anyway, we then had Zachary Bell weighing in, because Tony Gonzalez met with Coast Guard Petty Officer Scott Ruskin when he was awarded the Legion of Merit during the State of the Union. Now, Zachary Bell, said, "Scott Ruskin is a hero, a good man, and my friend. Dragging his name into this won't clean yours. Leave my friends out of your damage control." But he wasn't the only one to comment on Tony meeting this guy, with angry cops coming in to say, "Ew, don't stand anywhere near that hero, you slimy adulterer." I don't know if you can tell, but it does not seem like the unsubscribed boys like Tony very much. Next up, we have this tweet. So this comes from the San Antonio Express News, which is one of the outlets that has actually been very good, I think, in covering this situation. And the quote that they have in this tweet ruffled some feathers. They quote, "Gonzalez may yet win and have a long career in politics, but the questions he has refused to answer will persist." If we scroll down here, you can see Donut Operator saying, "A long career in politics? Are you effing kidding me?" And then down here you had Brick Suit coming in with just a meme of people laughing. And then over here we had Donut Operator responding to Scott Greer. Now Scott Greer said, "It should be noted that Tony Gonzalez is one of the least reliable Republicans on immigration in Congress. Throughout the Biden administration, he made a big show of opposing GOP efforts to rein in the White House's open border policies." And Donut Operator responded and said, "This is the guy currently in charge of the biggest congressional district on the border. I'll be voting for Brandon Herrera." Obviously, I think Brandon's going to be much better than Tony on the border. I don't even know if I need to say that. And then finally, Donut Operator's response to Tony's response. So essentially, Tony Gonzalez so far, he's basically just denied everything. And what he said to the Texas Tribune, we've covered in a past video, but in their tweet where they talk about it, they say, "U.S. Representative Tony Gonzalez, Republican San Antonio, blamed his GOP opponent, Brandon Herrera, for politicizing the death of his former staffer on Wednesday, a day after the San Antonio Express News reported on a text message from the woman admitting to having an affair with Gonzalez." Donut Operator paraphrased this in his tweet, saying, "He pointed out that I shouldn't be representing anyone is crazy work." Because essentially this response seemed to be Tony blaming Brandon for everything and saying that the whole thing is political. Now, is it wrapped up in politics? Is there a lot of politics involved in this? Yeah, Brandon has been using this for his campaign. I can't blame him. Obviously, this kind of thing is the kind of thing that gets brought up in politics, just as Bill Clinton. But what has been interesting is Tony Gonzalez has been missing House votes. So this was posted on February 25th. I'm not sure exactly when this video is going out. And Jamie Dupree here, who's a Congressional reporter, notably one that Donald Trump has called a dope, he said, "After missing 5 of 6 votes on Tuesday, Representative Gonzalez missed both House votes today." And then he has this post here, "Gonzalez defiant after texts, affair revelations, not gonna resign." Gonzalez again declined to answer questions about his late staffer. And then he said, "But what you've seen is not all the facts." But essentially, yeah, it seems like he's missing votes. If you're a congressman and you miss votes, you probably shouldn't be a congressman. Like, there's certain exceptions, like if you have a medical thing or something. But realistically, what are you doing? If you're in Congress, you need to be at the votes. Otherwise, what's the point? You might as well just resign if you're not going to be there voting. It's ridiculous. I do not think that we should allow congressmen to not vote. And if he's going to continue to not vote, maybe he should resign. I'll just be honest here. Whether or not the allegations end up being true, obviously, like he pointed out in this quote, what you've seen is not all the facts. He's going to have his own side to this, which nobody's heard yet. But even if he's completely innocent, it's ridiculous that he is missing votes in Congress when that's literally his job, right? If you're a congressman, what else do you have to do? You vote and you shake hands. That's it. That's a congressman's job. Sometimes maybe you talk to somebody, answer a phone call, but realistically, the most important thing they do is pass laws. So if you're not going to be there to do that, why even be in office? It's just ridiculous. Anyway, I do think that Brandon will be a better choice. Personally, it's my personal opinion. And I do think that Brandon probably won't miss that many votes. Which does mean I think that the upload schedule for Brandon's channel, which is already, not every day, is going to get a little worse if he does win. And I think the Unsubscribed podcast is probably going to end up having a lot less videos, which is going to be the downside of this whole thing if he does win. At this point, I kind of expect him to. So I don't know. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Is it acceptable for Gonzalez to be missing votes? Which of the Unsubscribed boys had the best reaction? And are you upset that we're going to be missing out on Unsubscribed podcast episodes if Brandon wins this? Or at least he won't be in them. Though who knows? Maybe they'll do them from his office. I guess we'll find out. Thank you so much for watching. Once again, remember to like and subscribe. Have a great day and God bless you.